Hi everyone, in this tutorial we're going to cover scaling, rotating, reflecting, shearing and skewing. We'll look at how to rotate and duplicate at the same time, how to scale and duplicate, and also grouping and ungrouping. Alright, let's get started. The tools we'll be using are in the toolbar menu here, but they can also be found up in the top menu. If we select an object and you come up to Object, Transform, here's where you can also find the rotate, reflect, scale, and shear tools. But we'll be using them on the side here. So we already went over how to scale and rotate our objects using the direct select tool. And with that you can just select it and grab one of these points, and when you have the double arrows like that, you can just grab it and scale it. And if you don't hold down any buttons, you can scale it freeform like this, any direction you want. And if you hold down Shift while you scale, it's going to scale it proportionately, both sides. But we also have the scale tool here you could use. So what that allows you to do is scale it by an anchor point. The anchor point is this little center point right here. So if we select our object and go down to our scale tool right here on the toolbar, you can also get to it by using the shortcut key S. So select that tool, and now when you grab the corner to scale it, it's going to scale it from the middle, from where that anchor point is. You can also move that anchor point to wherever you want by just clicking before you scale. Now it's up here, and when we scale it, it's going to scale from that corner. Think of it like you're putting a pin in your object here, and it's going to anchor it down right there, and it'll scale it from that point. So we can move it down there and scale it from there. Now we're not going to have strokes on our objects in this project, but I wanted to show you how to do this anyway. If you want to scale up this rectangle and also have your stroke scale with it, so as the rectangle gets bigger, the stroke around it, this outline, will also get thicker. You can do that by double clicking on the scale tool to bring up the options, and you want to make sure that the scale strokes and effects is checked on. So check that on and hit OK. Now when we select our object and select our scale tool, when we scale it up, it's also going to thicken the stroke on it. So that saves you a step of scaling up your rectangle and then going and selecting your stroke, going to the properties, and making it thicker. This automatically does it for you. We'll hit undo. If you scale it with that option selected off, you can scale up your object without scaling the stroke. It's going to stay the same size. Alright, let's just undo that, and we'll move on to shearing and skewing. Shearing is taking an object and skewing it to change the angles of the sides. So say we want to take this blue rectangle here and turn it into a tabletop. So we want the angles to give us a little more perspective. So what you could do is select the object and then go to your shearing tool. And that is located under your scale tool. Click and hold to bring up the drop-down menu and select your shear tool. Now with your object selected, you can just click and drag anywhere on it, and it's going to skew the object. So this is great for adding some perspective or just changing the shape of your object. I'm going to undo this, and we can also adjust the anchor point like we did with the scaling tool. You can drop it wherever you want, and then when you shear it, it's going to be anchored to that point there. And that's the shearing tool. Alright, let's take a look at rotating now. Like with scaling, we briefly covered this in the shapes tutorial. If we select our object with our direct selection tool, you could rotate it by hovering over one of the points until you get this curved arrow icon. Once you get that, you can click and just drag to rotate. Now this will probably be the way you usually scale and rotate your objects, but just like with the scale tool, there's also a rotate tool that gives you a few more options. You can click the rotate tool, you can just click anywhere on your object and rotate it, and like with the scale tool, you can change the anchor point. So if you want to rotate it from this point here, you can do that. You can rotate it from down here, and wherever you move it, it's just going to rotate it on that point. You also have options when you double click the rotate tool to rotate it by the angle. Make sure your preview is selected or you won't be able to see it as you turn it. Alright, and that's the rotating tool. Alright, next let's take a look at reflecting. So we have this face here that's missing an ear. So if we want to make another ear, instead of making another one from scratch, we could just copy this one and then reflect it so it'll be flipped. So what you want to do is select it, and we can come up to the object here and do transform reflect, and that'll flip it. But we want to make sure we have a copy of it first before we do that. So let's select it, copy. I'm going to do Control C, or come up to here and do edit copy and edit paste. And so that's going to give us the second ear here. We need it flipped and facing the other way. So what you can do is select it, and then we can come over to our reflect tool, which is nested under the rotate tool. So if you click and hold and select the reflect tool, or use the shortcut O. So I'm going to select the reflect tool, and if you double click on it with the ear selected, it's going to give you these options here. So you want to make sure you have preview selected, or you're not going to be able to see the changes. So let's select preview, and it's going to flip on the vertical axis. If you want it flipped on the horizontal, you could do that, and it's flipping, but since it's the same on either side of the horizontal axis, it's not going to look any different. So let's select the vertical axis to get it flipped on the proper one, and we'll hit OK. And now you can just grab it and move it into place. Now let's say we want to make this flower shape here. We can start with something like this, and what you can do is copy and paste it and rotate it. If we do it like this, we can rotate it a little bit, move it into place, copy it again, rotate it a little more, move it into place. But that is going to take a lot of time and it won't be exact. So I'm going to just undo that with Control Z. And what we're going to do is rotate duplicating. So if we select this object and go into our rotate tool with the reflect tool, come over to rotate or use the shortcut key R. We want to double click on the tool to bring up our options. Okay, so what we want to do is rotate it. I'm going to rotate it at the angle that's already in here at 45, and we can hit preview to see what it's going to do. And so it's going to move it by that much. But what we want to do is make a copy of it so it leaves our original one as well. So once you get the rotation you like, if you hit copy, it's going to copy that and leave our original one. Now you can keep doing that, go back in, and hit copy, and it'll keep doing it. Or there's a nice little shortcut key I'm going to teach you, and I want you all to remember this. It's going to be Control D, and what that does is it duplicates your last move that you did, so you don't have to go in and copy and flip it each time. You can just hit Control D, and it'll automatically redo what you did last. So it's going to automatically make a new copy of it and rotate it. You can also move the anchor point to rotate. So this one we were rotating from the middle here. If we want to rotate from the bottom here, you can move the anchor point like we did before. Select your rotate tool. This time though, when you click, you want to make sure you hold Alt or Option on a Mac when you click. That's going to bring up the properties menu. If we just click now, it's going to move the anchor point but not give us any properties. So let's try that again. We'll select our object. We'll select the rotate tool. I'm going to hold down Alt, and you see you get those little dots beside the plus key when I do that, and then I'm going to click. So that already rotated in the preview so you can see what's happening. And if we were just to hit OK, it'll just rotate that. But again, we want to hit copy to make a copy of it. So that's going to copy it like that. And now if we hold Control and hit D, it's going to redo our last move. Alright, and we can do similar things with scale duplicating. We could scale up this ring here, but make a copy of it, leaving the original one. So let's select that, go back to our scale tool, which is under here, or you can use the shortcut key S. And then we're going to double click on it to bring up our options. And if we click, remember, scale strokes and effects, that's going to scale it so the stroke will scale up with it. And so now we want to scale it up by maybe 125%. And let's hit copy. And so what that did was scale it up by 125%, but it made a copy of it, so it left the original. And now again, if we hold Control and press D to duplicate that last move, it's going to make another copy. And we could keep going with that. Alright, that's how you use rotate duplicating and scale duplicating. I'm just going to undo this so we can see a little better. Alright, let's take a look at grouping and ungrouping. Now we went over this in an earlier tutorial, but I'll quickly go over it again. So if we have all these objects here, we could put them all on the same layer and make a layer for them, and then we could just select that layer. But sometimes you want to just be able to select the object in your panel here. And if we want this all as one object, we can just highlight them all, or you can hold Shift and select them all individually like that. Once you have them all selected, you can come up to Object and select Group, or you can right-click on it and go to Group here, or I'll just select them all again. You can do Control-G. Now what that did was make them all into a group. So if you select it, it's going to select everything. They're still individual objects, so we can ungroup this anytime we want, but when you select it, it's going to be one group. So now say we want to separate them. You can just right-click on that and hit Ungroup. Or if we come up to Object here, we can do Ungroup. The shortcut for Ungroup is Shift-Control-G. So let's just go Ungroup, and now they're back to their own individual pieces. Alright, that's going to wrap up this tutorial.